You're listening to Death of the Reader, Flex here for your Murder Mystery World Tour, and I am joined in studio by arch nemesis, best friend, whatever we're going with at this point, Benjamin Stevenson, author of the Everyone series. And Ben, it's wonderful to have you back on the show.
Thank you. I'll take arch nemesis and best friend. That's a combination of those. It's good.
I guess the first thing I wanted to get into with Everyone This Christmas Has a Secret is actually your other short fiction, because it's been a bit of a year of short fiction between this book and your Audible ones that have come out in their print editions this May. What's been dragging you over to short fiction?
Well, I had a book called Fool Me Twice, which is 2 novellas back to back, and you can flip it over and read the second one, which was just a fun kind of idea to republish some books that I wrote a couple of years ago. So it's their first time in print, but they were on Audible as Audible originals. And the idea behind those ones originally was that Audible listeners or people who listen to audiobooks, you know, there's kind of a perfect length for specific types of stories. So like 4.5 hours just for people to kind of dig in, do the gardening, do the dishes. They've listened to a whole story and it's done, rather than kind of 10 hours, which is a full novel. They're really fun, kind of short, twisty mysteries. And we just thought, let's put them into print, because a lot of people haven't had the opportunity to read them because they were on Audible. So that was that. And then this one, the opportunity came up to do a Christmas-themed Ernest Cunningham mystery to follow on from my first 2 Ernest books. And it was really exciting and really fun, but in order to meet the US publishing deadline, I had to write it really quickly. So not that there was a compromise on length, but the best way to do a Christmas special was to be economical with it. And, you know, it's published as a gift hardback, so it's a really beautiful hardback. And the great thing about it was, as an experiment in the modern novel, modern novels, crime novels, can go up to 120, 130,000 words. My novels are always kind of 80 to 90, so they're already sitting comfortably there. Agatha Christie, they're 50,000 words. So this one is 50,000 words. So it's still a full-length mystery, and it's more in the vein of the Golden Age detective, but it is slightly shorter than a modern novel. So it was a really interesting exercise in really trying to write like the Golden Age mysteries.
It was actually lots of fun, because I said to your publicist, I was like, I got the book a little bit late. I'm not sure if we're quite going to be able to squeeze this in before I've got a work trip going on and everything. And then I finished it on the one drive back from where I was in Lismore. And it was just like such a nice breathing pace of a novel. Like, do you feel Ernest is more at home at that length in some respects?
I'm very insistent on myself when I write that I don't lag the pace ever. I don't spend a lot of time describing the environment, or I'm not that kind of writer. But this was like another level. Like, it doesn't stop at all. It's plot, 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 plot. Especially when you've got kind of 6 suspects, 2 murders, and you're squeezing it in. So it really is a rocket ship. But the other thing was that I really wanted to structure it. As you'll know, the book is an advent calendar. So it's a mystery that's told through 24 chapters, and it gives you 1 clue per chapter. And then at the end, in chapter 24, it gives you the killer. So you're supposed to read it like an advent calendar. So once I had that idea, then I'd constrained myself. It doesn't matter the length of the chapters, but this book can only be 24 chapters. And so in order to write a good scene, it can't be too long a chapter, otherwise a chapter gets boring. So it's sort of self-managed itself, because I was really trying to hit 24 chapters so I could do 24 clues.
I did love having the advent calendar at the start of the book. Like, I took a photo of it on my phone, and I was sat there in the car with my colleagues on the way back from this work trip, like scribbling over it, and like their secret letters spelled out in the advent calendar. What other clues?
Oh, I should have done that.
Here?
Oh, that's such a good idea. No, I didn't even think about that.
My colleague looks over at me. He's like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah. Well, I always view my job as the author is to give you all the clues so that you can solve it yourself if you're that type of reader. And if you're not, then my detective will solve it for you in the final chapter. But this was kind of a more obvious way of doing it, where I literally will tell you what the clue is that I wanted you to look at. And then, I still think it's challenging to look at all 23 clues together and put them together into the mystery. But it is there. And that makes it even more satisfying, I think, when I tell you the ending and the reader goes, oh, he did tell me to look at the big blue box. He told me.
I mean, one of the things I really loved about the way that the mystery was structured in this story too was that, there's a point that Ernest makes in the novel that, much like the magician, when you're told to look somewhere, you're meant to look somewhere else in a sort of vein. And I really loved that the sort of 1 main clue per chapter thing doled that out in a way that, as you say, kept the pace really tight, but also made that game of trying to play with your background clues, which you're so excellent at, this extra piece of challenge because I'd be like, oh, that's a good background clue. And then it'd be the final clue for the chapter. I'm like, oh, that's not it.
There's something else. Yeah. But I think, and that as well, it's all operating in the kind of look here and I'm doing something else. But the other thing about being, obtuse with the clues and telling you what they are is my favorite type of clue in a mystery book is where you know what the clue is, but it's not what you think it is. So the author has told you very clearly that this isn't, a torn check stub or something. This is important. And then at the end, it is the clue that solves it, but it's not a torn check stub at all. It's something else. And then you see the whole book in a new light, but it's been right in front of you the whole time, and you just need that reinterpretation.
Yeah. I mean, very obvious example in this book that had me grinning the moment I spotted it. But I guess that leads me into asking about Ernest Cunningham's 7 Commandments of Holiday Specials. Did they come before the book or after?
Well, as people who've read my first 2 books know, I kind of am inspired by it. I want to fit, Ronald Knox's Decalogue and S.S. Van Dyne's rules and basically the rules of fair play mysteries. So when I sat down to write a Christmas special, none of them have kind of dictated what the actual kind of tone or requirements of a Christmas special were. So it was up to me to make them. So before I wrote the novel, I wrote out the 7 Commandments of Holiday Specials that I would like to stick to. And, there's stuff like the killer cannot be the person that hates Christmas. It's too predictable. The detective must learn the true meaning of the word Christmas. Select cameos for budgetary reason of the cast, even though I don't have a budget writing a book. So those kind of things were what I stuck to. And originally they were at the start of the novel in the same way that the rules are at the start of my other novels. But I moved them to the back because I felt he still tells you what they are, but I felt like it was better to kind of finish the book and then look at the rules and go, oh, yes. And, the rules, they are clues to the mystery themselves because I'm telling you what I'm going to do and then I'm playing with that.
Well, because it's a bit of a delicate balance too, playing with a holiday special idea for reasons that the rules go into, where like you can't have too much development happen in the special in case people are only following the, quote, mainline novels.
Yeah, it's going to be like kind of an isolated, standalone adventure. Like I said before, my books are inspired by the Golden Age, but the holiday special kind of angle, it's more the modern take of some of the classics, like BBC's Sherlock. They do but I mean, generally,
there was a very specific dig at that one. I felt in
was there? I mean, no, I like that one. But I genuinely think the rules for the holiday specials are as much developed by the BBC in general than the Golden Age crime novels. So things like Doctor Who, they really nail the procedural elements of this is what a holiday special is and this is how you do it. And so I fed that slightly more than Sherlock Holmes' Christmas mystery is not really a Christmas mystery. It doesn't have all the things like another one of the rules is that characters have to dress up in a silly Christmas costume. And that's very much Doctor Who, BBC, Sherlock. They kind of define that era of Christmas special for me.
Although it is interesting now that I think about it, that like Doctor Who in particular has a reputation for having massive plot development happen in the Christmas special. So then they have to recover it later in the successive season in some ways.
Yeah, definitely. And like my inspirations are as broad as, Scrooge McDuck doing a Christmas special, So it's all kind of that fun pop culture Christmassy stuff thrown together. But yeah, you're right about Doctor Who there.
The other thing I do love about the way that you've sort of done that Christmas special with only cameos from the main cast is that so much of this book is like Ernest reinforcing his learning of things he's learnt about himself and his relationship with others in the other books, but not in a way that feels like, recitation.
Yeah. Well, he's definitely, one of the differences in my novels to Golden Age Detective Mysteries is that Ernest does have to evolve and change and have a character arc, whereas in the old ones, that the puzzle is enough and they just go on and they're just exactly the same person every time intellectually. So Ernest does have to grow. But what I really enjoyed doing with this one was it's his 3rd murder mystery. He's getting quite good at the detective thing. So the bumbling fool doesn't work as well in certain scenes. He actually has to walk into the room and say, this, and this, and I've spotted it all. And so I'm kind of leveling up his detective skills, and that relates to how he deals with other characters in the book, suspects, and so because he's a better detective now.
Well, yeah, I guess one of the interesting things, I was talking with Chris Hammer recently about the Valley and how some of his characters, he sort of, with Martin Scarsden, phased them out because he didn't have skin in the game anymore. And in some respects, I would have felt like Ernest's skin in the game was his relation to the genre as an insider on the outside. And I'm curious for you how it feels writing an Ernest that actually does kind of know what he's doing now in this book.
It's getting more difficult to kind of sell that in those scenes where I'm trying to put it together, because he's not a genius, so he can't do crimes where the knowledge is implied. So if there's some kind of scientific or technical element, somebody has to explain it to him. He can relate what's happening to those explanations and then solve the mystery, but he's not Encyclopedia Britannica. He can't just go to the wall of, 221 Baker Street, pull out a book and find some obscure South American poison. So I need to find that balance where he can't know everything, but he is an improved person. And then, it's interesting in terms of finding the right character and comparing it to how Chris has moved from Martin Scarsden to Ivan and Nell. It's about the crime being right for the person that is solving the crime, that you're telling the novel from the perspective of. So Ernest, I accept that there is only a limited number of murders that he can stumble upon until, there's other stuff that can happen. Somebody needs to actually hire him, or, these kind of entries into the murders rather than kind of stumbling on the scenes. And then there's stories that aren't right for Ernest. They're not the right murders for him to solve because he doesn't have the characteristics that would be needed to solve that murder. So it's really just finding the right plot point for the series character and going, this feels like an Ernest novel, and therefore he should solve it. But yeah, I'm trying to grow him. I think with this book, Everyone This Christmas Has a Secret, it's got the most complex murder. So in this one, I was very interested in setting Ernest. He's always got a complicated puzzle to solve that's really fun and has a lot of elements to it. But this one, the structure of the murder and how the murder happens was the most complexly plotted one. So he had to level up to unpack that. And then I think as a reward for that, it's the most complex and satisfying kind of reveal when he kind of puts it all together. So I was definitely trying to do that.
Well, I mean, the other challenge, I suppose, in that vein is that Ernest is like selling his books in the fiction of his own world and has sort of become a minor celebrity. Do you feel like that's a bit of a trap that you've set for yourself in some ways as a writer, where his notoriety gets in the way of his role as a character?
Yeah, so in this one, he's followed around by a paparazzi journalist who's a bit of a nuisance. And it would be implausible for the number of murders that he's solved for him to not be known by some people. So I used it kind of as a catch-22, he's disrespected by the police because they know that he's going to be annoying, but also it does kind of help him get into rooms. He can sort of say, to people, I solve murders and you should answer my questions. So it does help unlock a little bit of that suspect interrogation. But yeah, totally. I mean, minor celebrity is putting it probably more than what he is in the books, but
it is from his perspective that we hear these words.
Yeah, right. I think in the second book he describes his royalty checks as being coins, so he's renowned for it. And that's useful as well because, as I said, I'm working on the next book now and I'm looking for the inn, and it's at the point where maybe somebody can call Ernest up and say, I need your help, which is a good in for the murder mystery. So it's like a balancing act with making him too well renowned in the world of the books, but also in the world of the books, he's now solved 14 murders, I think. So it adds up, and you've got to kind of respect that in that world, that would be a topic of conversation in any room that he walks in.
Oh, yeah. I guess the other one that really fascinated me was the setting of the Blue Mountains, because I feel like there was the snow setting of Everyone in My Family's Killed Someone, the train in the second, and now you open this with an Arthur Conan Doyle quote about Katoomba. And it was so interesting thinking about how we've sort of distanced ourselves from this idea of the Blue Mountains as quite as terrifying as perhaps it once was back in Conan Doyle's day. What drew you to that setting?
Well, a few things. I wanted it to be out of Sydney. I don't really like writing the urban settings, but I'm also not like really an environmentally driven writer. I want the setting that serves the plot. I'm not just going to find a beautiful spot and put it there. But I learned that Conan Doyle had visited Australia in the 1920s and he'd gone to the Blue Mountains and he'd said, I can't remember the quote verbatim, but he said, what a place to get lost and you could easily die here and disappear. And there's all these great kind of Blue Mountains folklore. There's a guy that left his glasses and his shoes on the top of a cliff and pretended that he jumped off and, no one knows what happened to him. So there's all this kind of folklore around there, which is, speaks as a nice setting for the novel. But then otherwise, it's a Christmas set novel, and I'm lucky enough to be published globally. And I wanted to do a baking hot bushland Australian summer. I wanted to show what our Christmas is like.
I love the pin pulled on a hand grenade line. That was
Right.
beautiful.
Well, so in the book for the listeners, it's every conversation you have in December in Australia is just a countdown to somebody saying hot out, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I wanted to really make it sizzle because one of the things I get from my US readers is I get emails about the first book shocked that it snows in Australia.
Yeah.
And emails, they're confused about things like why doesn't every character just have a gun and things like that. And so I was like, well, I'm going to show you our Christmases. Ernest is writing the book on Christmas Eve. He's typing out what's happened to him. He's got a glass of white wine sweating beside him. His family's all lying in the pool. I mean, that's such a iconic Australian kind of thing, and we don't see enough of it. Even our Christmas stuff, it's still kind of snowy and tinsel draped, and I'm like, let's do it the Australian way. And so the Blue Mountain was a really perfect location to kind of do that. And I didn't want to do the beach because I've done the beach in another book. And so it's really, for me now, it's kind of like I need to find somewhere where I haven't done it before and where I haven't seen a lot of other stuff as well. There's been a few Blue Mountains books this year, but when I was writing it, there weren't really a lot. The other thing is, I set it in the Blue Mountains and half of it's set indoors at a theatre. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the other interesting set piece is that, like, as well as being, indoors in the Blue Mountains, there's, like, tourist hotspots in the Blue Mountains that you've set it in, which is something that I think a lot of books would eschew, and you put to really interesting effect in ways that are too late in the game for me to...
Oh, I'll talk about it.
Let's do it then.
Oh, the finale is set on the cable car over Echo Point, so it's 300 meters in the air on the cable car.
I've gotten too used to talking with Chris Hammer. I can just throw spoilers out here. It's great.
Well, it's not really... I mean, I just really loved, you watch it winch over the valley and you think there's danger there, and one of the things you look for in a kind of classic detective mystery is where am I going to do the parlor scene where the detective gathers them all and locking them in that cable car. I think that was the first thing I came up with. I'm like, I'm going to put all the suspects in this cable car.
Now, had you done the final cable car scene by the time that you did your own cable car choose your own adventure mystery?
So they invited me, and it's the same as the second book, which was set on the GAN. Yeah. And the people who run the GAN said, do you want to come on the train and do a talk about the book? And then this one set in the gondola, and they said, do you want to come on the gondola and do a talk about the book? I'm like, hell yeah, I do.
I guess the other thing I wanted to dive into is all of the characters, because obviously, Christmas special, you can't introduce anything too complex for the main characters as Ernest's rules go into. Coming up with people for a bite-sized golden age length murder mystery, was that a different challenge to coming up with characters for another story?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about, detective fiction is all about withholding the information from the reader. So how big is this person's secret and how long can you hold it? And then when you develop a cast of characters, particularly if you're going for brevity, the length of time which they hold their secret is shorter. I wouldn't know for sure, but I feel like I have like one or two less suspects in this book than the others, just so I can get them all in. And yeah, just really nailing down their characters and their wants and making sure that it's surprising and that they're all involved in the different twists as efficiently as you can is a huge challenge. So I was looking for, the group of people. It's set at a magician's show and it's everyone involved with the show. So the magician, the magician's assistant, the producer, the assistant, the hypnotist, the tech, and those roles really helped me kind of isolate the characters and build their relationship with the murder victim in a way that it would be clear to Ernest quickly. So I didn't have to have him ask so many questions. Not that it's implied knowledge, the novel tells it to you, but it's quite obvious that the murder victim's assistant is therefore, working for him, and then you can kind of go through from there. So those kind of things I think helped, but also every character has to, and this is the same no matter how brief, how tight a novel you're writing, every character has to add value to the scene and the plot. And so I was pretty ruthless with, I had two characters in there that I combined in the final edit because I'm like, they're doing the same thing for the plot, so why don't I just make them the same person? And that helped it a lot.
Yeah, well, I think one of the other interesting things too is that like all three books, but especially the last two in the Everyone series, have had very strong archetypal characters, and as such on the blurb of both of the books. Do you feel like that's one of the main ways that you kind of distill a character is kind of pinning an archetype to them?
Yeah, an archetype, a kind of preconceived kind of plot function of how that person would serve in a golden age murder mystery, I think is really important. But I think that because when you've got a room full of suspects, they all must be absolutely different to one another. So you can't have all the suspects in the novel be 40-year-olds that went to the same high school. Because that's a different type of murder mystery. That's what happened between these people and will it come out? I need 5 people of all different ages, of all different backgrounds and all different motives and all different kind of statuses. And that way I can develop 5 convincing motives that hopefully the reader believes that all of them are possible, as opposed to which of these generally monogamous characteristics are going to, which one of these people is going to be the person because they've all got the same motive, rather than they're all distinct and clear. And so that's, I go into clear, concise character beats that isolate the characters distinctly from each other. And then I grow them out from there in hopefully a way that's not as stereotypical as the archetypes that they kind of start off as.
The obvious both murder mystery and good distinction example there is the twins in this book, the Lynns, Sam and Teresa. And one of the interesting things for them is that, like, they're so different apart, but also in a murder mystery story where you've told us that in some way they are going to swap, does it become difficult to, like, flesh them out as real characters when by the murder mystery archetype we look at them and we expect deception?
Yeah, so, well, the reason the twins are in this book is because in the first 2 books I kind of harped on about how one of the rules of murder mysteries is you shouldn't have identical twins because it's not fair. I am an identical twin. So I was kind of feeling like a bit of a charlatan that I'm writing these books and saying, well, you can't have identical twins. And I'm living a lie. So I wanted to do twins, and the only way to do twins fairly is to say, as I do in the book, as you said, Ernest says right up the top, I'm going to tell you right now there's identical twins, and I'm going to tell you right now they're going to switch. And therefore, when it happens, you're not going to feel cheated by it, because that's the whole thing. Hopefully it happens in a way that readers don't expect, and, I have a bit of fun with it, as I always do. In terms of characterization, it's actually way easier because the dichotomy between the 2 twins, because they are different. So one of them is kind of prosperous and successful and the other is down on their luck. And so you can actually draw the line between those 2 very, very easily. So I actually found that quite fun because it's 2 polar opposites and that was easy to make them distinct. But I'm playing with the fact that the audience, as soon as you say there's twins, there's the expectation of something's going to happen with the twins. And how do I fulfill that expectation and subvert it at the same time is the challenge putting the twins in the book gave me.
I think one of the things that the twins are a really good example of what this book does really excellently is that all of the characters, as you say, they have a motivation that you build really strongly. Like that's the purpose, the intention, the structure of the murder mystery. But because they are all so distinct and they are these archetypes, it rides this line between, like, playing the commedia dell'arte type thing and having all of these unique facets of, like, what are these people actually up to? What are their motives? And it fascinates me that it's a Christmas special from you, that we see these concepts, like, so distilled. What was the main lesson you walked away from this book with for Ernest's next venture?
Oh, that is such a good question. Well, maybe I haven't learned it yet because I'm in the middle of writing Ernest's next adventure. I think the group of people and what brings them together in a mystery that Ernest enters into is so important. What are their simmering resentments and what would people do to each other? And what would they kill for? Not what would you and I kill for? What would they... Do I believe that they would kill for it? And like you say, distilling those kind of character beats and then growing them into multifaceted characters as well, I think is really important. I think one of the things, like I said before, the murder is plotted more by the killer. It's less kind of opportunistic as some of the other books. So one of the things that I'm realizing and learning is that Ernest is only as good as the villain he's up against. And I'm at the point where the villains have to get smarter and smarter. So maybe I'm kind of moving into, like, my Moriarty era, Not saying it's going to be like a returning character, but the genius of the murderer now has to be that next level because he is a recurring series detective.
You do mull on that idea of the Moriarty and how that sort of has historically been blown out of proportion by successive media. Like, Moriarty appeared once and has now become the arch nemesis. In Curtain, Poirot, as you say, makes a decision that he wouldn't against anyone else.
Yeah. I think the thing about those guys, and as he says in the books, Moriarty's in the books isn't pulling the strings on this whole grand scene in the way that he does in the modern adaptations. But what they do, and what makes them the arch nemesis, is that they beat the detective. They beat them morally. And even if it's only in one story, then being beaten morally for Poirot is a huge loss. So that's what makes them the arch nemesis, rather than this, like in James Bond, where they tried to get Blofeld in the new one, and he said, I am the architect of all of your pain.
Oh,
and they tried to tie every movie to him, and it's like, it's better when they're just a psychopath, but they win.
Yeah.
So the moral victory is more important to me than the kind of string pulling.
Is it possible to have a moral victory with Ernest when so much of these books has been about his flaws?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, where would he compromise in terms of getting something right? I mean, he wobbles the line in this one. He thinks that getting the right outcome is it more important than getting the right answer, and the answer to me is no, and that would have been a moral loss. But it would be hard for Ernest to have. I mean, that's a really interesting thought, actually, that will probably plague him going forward, because I just find that really interesting. That arch nemesis, which I know you said I was yours, but the arch nemesis, it's so specific. It's such an interesting kind of character trait to kind of play with, which I do a bit in this, but maybe I need a bigger villain.
I guess we'll see. I suppose the last thing I want to get on recording, I was at once overjoyed and frustrated with the Christmas clue, Ernest learning the true meaning of Christmas in this book, because I was like, I'm on it. I know what's happening. I know what's going on here. We get like so many chapters long to the Comic Sans moment, and I knew instantly that I had messed up in a small but meaningful way that meant that 200 words of notes. I was just like, get rid of all of this. Yeah.
Oh, fascinating. Okay. And you realized you messed it up. I mean, for readers, and again, Ernest kind of chats through spoilers. One of the things I really love is, putting clues in the form of the book. In the first book, it's a full stop. In the second, it's an Oxford comma. And in this one, the font choice is important. So is that when you realized you'd messed it up?
Yeah.
Or was it? Oh,
because the thing is I have one pop culture fact about Comic Sans, and it's the relevant one.
Oh, okay.
So when I saw Comic Sans, I was like, oh, we're so close.
Yeah, I sent it to my publishers, and I'm like, okay, we're going to do this page in Comic Sans. And he could just, I mean, they were very great about it, but I felt so guilty emailing it off. I'm like, oh, has anybody ever put Comic Sans in a book? The maniacs. So I felt a bit diabolical doing that. But it's good okay, tell me off mic. I want to hear because you often work things out quite well. And I knew there are a couple of clues when I was walking in here. I'm like, I reckon he'll have the clue here, but I wonder if he has the full kind of context.
Yeah, well, I suppose we'll leave it on that enticing note. And you can read the book and find out what delightful clues Benjamin Stevenson has laid in Everyone This Christmas Has a Secret. Benjamin, it's wonderful having you on the program again, and thank you so much for appealing to my golden age murder mystery soul.
No worries. Thank you for having me on. Pleasure.
You're listening to Death of the Reader on 2SER 107.3. Flex here for your murder mystery world tour, and thank you once again to Ben Stevenson for joining us to talk about Everyone This Christmas Has a Secret. Thank you to Penguin for sending us copies of the book. We'll be back with more next time. Stick around, get subscribed. I'm out of here.